The moment was already tense, but nobody expected what happened next. John Roberts' face flushed with indignation, slammed his palm on the desk with a crack that echoed across the room. Cameras snapped to attention. Microphones shook. A ripple went through the chamber. Then, leaning in, eyes narrowed as if he were issuing a threat, he spat the words across the table. "You are dangerously out of order, Congresswoman." That's when time slowed. A single camera cut to Jasmine Crockett. Not blinking, not flinching, not backing down. The sound faded. All that remained was her expression, the kind of calm you only earn when you've been interrupted 1,000 times and still refuse to shrink. She could have trembled, deferred, apologized. Instead, she simply stared back, unbothered. She'd heard worse, from louder men in more desperate rooms. The country held its breath. The voiceover broke in like a heartbeat. This wasn't just a hearing. This was America watching a woman stand her ground. The irony? Moments earlier, Roberts had been trying to wrap up the discussion with one of his trademark monologues bragging about transparency, lawfulness, respect for process. But the second Crockett dared to question his record, dared to quote his own words back to him, the mask cracked. His voice, once measured and smooth, had turned sharp and brittle. His confidence had faltered. And yet there she sat, steady, measured, aware. People watching at home didn't need a policy degree to see what was happening. This was power trying to reassert itself. This was legacy trying to crush dissent. This was a man used to being the loudest voice in the room, suddenly realizing he wasn't anymore. You could feel the tension like electricity through the screen. The committee members shifted in their seats. A few looked away, embarrassed. Others watched, frozen, knowing history doesn't announce itself, it shows itself. And in that instant, everyone watching could feel it. Something inside the room was changing. A line was being drawn. A truth was about to break loose. But this wasn't the moment the country will remember. That was coming next. Long before the desk-slamming moment, millions were already watching. The stakes were sky-high. The hearing was being pitched as a procedural review of committee ethics and campaign transparency. But anyone paying attention knew it was something deeper. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a proxy battle over who gets to speak in America and who gets silenced. On paper, the discussion was about enforcing standards for political donations, ensuring that money wasn't secretly buying influence. Roberts framed it as a defense of democracy, a neutral process aimed at transparency. But Jasmine Crockett knew better. She had spent years studying the spaces between the lines, the loopholes buried in the language, the budgets no one questioned. And what she found challenged everything Roberts claimed to stand for. That's why her presence rattled him. Roberts had crafted an image of himself, the honorable gatekeeper, the seasoned defender of electoral integrity. But Crockett's questions weren't just questions, they were surgical strikes, capable of cutting through the veneer and exposing the machinery beneath. Each time she addressed him, she carried not just facts, but a kind of moral clarity. She was informed, she was direct, and she refused to play the game he'd perfected. That's what made him uneasy. Because if her words reached beyond those walls, if they echoed past the committee room and out into the public square, the narrative he'd built could crumble. That's the real story here. Not the procedural jargon or the formal language of policy, but the invisible stakes beneath it. The stakes of who gets to define truth. Why did Roberts fight so hard to silence her? Why did millions watch it live? Because they saw themselves in her. People who had been talked over in boardrooms, doubted in classrooms, made to feel like they were dangerously out of order simply for speaking up. They watched as she calmly laid out contradictions, citing amendments, line items, receipts, and they knew something bigger was shifting. It wasn't lost on viewers that Roberts raised his voice as hers got sharper. It wasn't coincidence that he tried to call for a recess right as she presented the evidence. It wasn't subtle that his allies chimed in with procedural objections whenever she got too close to uncomfortable truths. This wasn't about the hearing anymore. It was about control. And Crockett, she wasn't there to play nice. She was there to dismantle the illusion with logic, with poise, with the certainty that transparency doesn't mean much if only certain people are allowed to speak. Viewers watched as Roberts' authority threatened to collapse not under shouting, but under questions. If one woman in one hearing could upturn the narrative, what else could change? They could feel it, the memory of every time a truth speaker was told to wait, to lower her voice, to stay in her lane. But Crockett stayed still. She didn't get louder. She got clearer. And that clarity was dangerous not to democracy, but to those who relied on its confusion. Little did they know a political earthquake was about to hit. John Roberts was a master of performance. Smooth voice, curated pauses, glasses tilted just so. He was the kind of politician who spoke in confident aphorisms with the assuredness of a man who believed his version of truth was absolute. The media loved him. His colleagues applauded him. His supporters called him a defender of American order. But for those who watched closely, who listened not just to his words, but to the timing of his silence, something was always just a little off. It wasn't the way he spoke. It was the way he didn't answer questions. 2 years earlier, during a high-profile hearing on public ethics, Roberts had leaned back in his leather chair and delivered what the press later called a mic-drop moment. Responding to accusations that he'd intentionally stalled a motion to audit his own campaign donations, he simply smiled and said, "If transparency is the issue, there's absolutely nothing to hide. Trust is earned, not surveilled." But his critics weren't asking for trust. They were asking for receipts. Yet something about the polished reply worked. He diffused the tension with ease, flashing that practiced tension-breaking smile at the cameras. That moment cemented his brand, John Roberts, the gentleman of debate, the immovable pillar in a sea of partisanship. But what the audience never saw was what happened after that hearing ended: closed doors, back-channel calls, an amendment quietly introduced to shield donor identities for the sake of public safety. Or 6 months later, when he gave an impassioned speech about freedom of information, only to later vote against a bill requiring real-time public access to lobbying records. On record, he was a champion of accountability. Off record, he was its gatekeeper. And then there were his committee theatrics. During a debate on campaign finance oversight, Rep. Michelle Alvarez, a junior member, dared to press him on contributions funneled through shell organizations. Roberts leaned in, palms together, eyes narrowed, just slightly the same look he would later give Jasmine Crockett, and spoke as if explaining something simple to a child. "Congresswoman, you're misinformed. It's not your fault. These topics take more experience to fully grasp." There it was, the tilt of the chin, the condescension hidden under the guise of courtesy. His supporters called it discipline. Others called it something else: control. That was his superpower, not loud lies, but subtle manipulation. He didn't shout or curse or fumble, he simply shifted frames, turned questions into personal critiques, made truth sound like misunderstanding. It was enough to make you doubt what you heard, enough to stall momentum, enough to wear people down. And each time he'd return to his brand, "Everything we do must protect the public trust." It sounded noble enough, yet repeatedly when that trust demanded action, he found a reason to postpone, reassess, reframe. So when Jasmine Crockett walked into that hearing room, unafraid to question his logic, it wasn't just a clash of ideas. It was a threat to the world he'd crafted, a world where he held court unchallenged, where his reputation kept scrutiny at bay, where words like order and integrity were tools, not truths. And truthfully, Roberts wasn't used to being challenged by someone like her, not because of her politics, but because she didn't seem intimidated by his performance. She'd done her homework. She wasn't defaulting to outrage. She was using facts. She was following procedure. She was speaking in the same language and daring him to respond. That's what rattled him. Because if she was right, if her receipts, her citations, her quotes held up, then his entire foundation could fracture. Not in a headline, not with a scandal, but with the quiet question of whether he truly believed what he was preaching. Before the world, he was composed. After all, cameras were rolling. But inside, a little voice had started whispering. "This one, she's different." His back straightened, his tone sharpened. He knew he had to regain control. But his control was slipping, and he felt it. Long before there were cameras, long before hearings and headlines, long before John Roberts tried to silence her, Jasmine Crockett knew what it meant to stand in rooms where your voice was not invited. She grew up in a modest home on the east side of a city most Americans would never visit. Her mother worked double shifts at a hospital. Her father fixed cars in the front yard to keep the lights on. They weren't rich, but they were rich in something that mattered more: conviction. Her grandmother, a first-generation immigrant who spoke more truth in one sentence than some politicians do in entire careers, taught her early on, "When you grow up around struggle, you learn what silence means." And silence, for Jasmine, was never an option. At school, she was the girl who raised her hand even when the boys laughed, who questioned the history book because one chapter left out stories she knew were real, who defended the new kid who didn't know the language yet. Even then, she understood that justice wasn't a speech. It was a decision repeated every day. In college, she worked 2 jobs, one at the campus library shelving books perched taller than her, another at a diner where she memorized the favorite orders of every regular between midnight and 6 a.m. The rest of her time was spent reading case studies, studying for exams, or organizing rallies on issues that didn't yet have hashtags. But there were nights she nearly gave up, nights when the weight of systems designed to keep her out pushed hard enough to bruise, nights she asked herself if it was worth it. On the worst of those, she'd call her grandmother, who would say in a voice unwavering and unmistakably strong, "The world will try to tell you your story doesn't matter. Don't let them finish your sentence." That sentence became her fire. She pursued law, civil rights, public service. And every step of the way, the rooms got harder, bigger. And yet she remained so rooted in who she was, it seemed the rooms eventually bent around her rather than the other way around. She wore braids into board meetings unapologetically. She didn't lower her voice or leave her heritage behind. When she won her first local office, she didn't throw a party at some well-lit civic hall, she held it in a park, the same one where she'd organized block cleanups, where neighbors grilled food and kids played tag in the grass. By the time she reached Congress, she had become a symbol, though she'd never asked to be. A living reminder that the halls of power don't belong to a select few, they belong to the people. Still, the newspapers wrote about her in 2 tones. Some called her sharp, resilient, even fearless. Others used words like divisive, abrasive, or unpolished. But she'd been called worse, as a public defender, as an activist, as a woman who refused to take on a more acceptable form. She stayed clear-eyed. For her, the job wasn't a title. It was the platform she'd earned to speak for others whose voices had been disregarded. This is why the moment with John Roberts mattered. It wasn't just about policy. It wasn't just about decorum. It was about every coded hesitation, every dismissal that sounded polite but carried the same message: you don't belong here. She recognized that energy the second Roberts raised his voice. She'd seen it before in courtrooms where a judge called her young lady instead of counsel, in debate halls where men critiqued her tone instead of answering her point, in civic circles where she was invited to observe, not to lead. But she hadn't risen through politeness. She hadn't built a movement through silence. Her staff liked to say that working with her was like standing inside a thunderstorm and realizing the lightning was on your side. She listened, she prepared, she strategized, and when it was time to speak, she did so with the precision of a scalpel and the force of a flood. That day in that hearing, when the cameras pulled back and the tensions rose, she didn't feel fear, she felt recognition. She knew that moment was bigger than her. Bigger than Roberts' outburst, bigger than any headline. She was part of a lineage A quiet army of truth-tellers who paved the way for her to sit in that chair with every right to speak her mind. Her tone wasn't angry. Her words weren't reckless. She was simply done yielding to the idea that logic has to be loud to be respected. She breathed, she planted her feet, she looked him in the eye. She'd earned her seat, now she'd defend it. The hearing room hummed with tension papers rustling, whispered conversations, cameras mounted like watchful eyes in every corner. The air seemed thick as Jasmine Crockett adjusted her mic, leaned forward, and began her line of questioning. "Representative Roberts," she said evenly, "you've stated publicly that you've never accepted support from unregistered entities. Could you clarify what you define as support?" Roberts didn't blink. He leaned back, hands clasped, that familiar half-smile stretching across his face. "Congresswoman," he began, voice dripping with patronage, "I'm happy to clarify. It concerns me that you might not understand the distinction." She cut in, tone still measured. "I understand just fine. The public, however, might benefit from hearing your definition." A murmur rippled across the chamber like a gust of wind. He cleared his throat. "Support, in this case, refers to documented campaign contributions within established legal channels." She nodded. "So unregistered businesses sending funds through intermediary committees that wouldn't qualify." His smile faltered. "That's not what I said." "It's what you did," she replied, now tapping the printed report in front of her. Roberts' eyes narrowed. "You are dangerously misinterpreting the regulations, Congresswoman. And you're dangerously close to deflecting from a straightforward question," she said, still calm, still unshaken. The exchange built like a drumbeat, sharp, exact, escalating. Viewers watching the live stream leaned forward in their seats. The comment sections buzzed. She got him. He doesn't know what's coming. Turn up the mic. Roberts lifted his chin, voice tightening. If you're accusing me of ethics violations, I'm asking you whether you believe the American people deserve to know if elected officials receive indirect support from entities they never disclose. Silence, a few seconds, the kind that feels like a verdict. Roberts coughed. I've always operated within the law. Great, then you won't mind answering my follow-up. He glared. I haven't finished speaking. And I haven't finished asking. Her finger hovered above the text of Section 203 of the committee's transparency guidelines. Your own language says any indirect financial benefit must be reported. Are you now saying that's not the standard you follow? He opened his mouth, closed it. His aide shifted in the seat behind him. Someone on the panel coughed loudly, breaking the silence that now weighed more than the room itself. You're twisting this, Roberts finally said. No, she replied, I'm quoting you. The crowd was eating it up. On live stream feeds, emojis exploded. Get him, Jasmine. This is historic. He's sweating. The committee chair attempted to interject. Let's remain civil. I am civil, Crockett replied, eyes locked on her target. I'm just not deferential to double standards. That line, it landed like a bell in a cathedral. One viewer clipped it instantly. Others typed, chills, that's the title of the documentary right there. Roberts tried once more. You are out of order and disrespecting. Order, she asked quietly. Is that what you call it when the rules only apply to some of us? Roberts' face reddened. His composure, once pristine, now cracked under the intensity of her logic. Every word she spoke tightened the frame around him. You're making this personal, he barked. No, she answered, finally raising her voice just enough to echo. I'm making it public. Gasps, whispers. Someone in the back whispered, oh my God. It was becoming all too clear Roberts wasn't just on the defensive. He'd been cornered, and she wasn't letting go. He shuffled his papers, voice breaking slightly. This is inappropriate. What's inappropriate, she said, is weaponizing the process to hide behind ambiguity. I'm just shining a light. If it burns, that's not on me. Viewers at home were yelling into the void, cheering, pausing, rewinding. There was no denying it, something seismic was happening. Her eyes flicked to the chair. Her tone softened. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here because the people who put me in this seat deserve clarity. Roberts gripped his pen like a lifeline. You'll regret this approach, he muttered, almost under his breath. She didn't flinch. Regret comes from silence, she said, and I'm done with silence. And then he crossed a line you don't come back from. He crossed the line quietly but unmistakably. Frankly, Congresswoman, John Roberts said, voice cold and clipped, I question your capacity to understand these issues. Maybe if you had more experience in oversight, your questions would carry weight. The words hit the room like a spark in dry grass. A few heads turned. Others looked down, feigning detachment, but the damage was done. He'd underestimated her, and more importantly, he'd overplayed his hand. The insult hung in the air, not as loud as his desk slap, but far more dangerous. It was coded. It was personal. It was condescending. And it was the moment Jasmine Crockett stopped questioning and started dismantling. She leaned forward, not aggressive, but unwavering. No rush, no fluster. Her voice came quiet as a blade. Are you accusing me of impropriety because you're terrified of my facts? The room froze. Every camera, microphone, every viewer held the same breath. Twitter detonated instantly. At voice like glass, she said what? At receipts or die, did this just become a movie? At Civic Rager, get popcorn, it's about to go down. Receipt Queen trending. Roberts blinked twice, thrown completely off his mark. What? No, I am saying your line of questioning lacks foundation. Oh, it has foundation, she said softly. You just don't like what it's built on. Beat 1, breakdown. With steady cadence, she pulled a binder closer, not a heated motion, but precise, like she'd practiced every step in her mind. She flipped a page, then another. No flourish, no showboating, just preparation meeting its moment. On July 14th, she said, reading aloud, your campaign received $27,000 in independent support through an entity called the Cumberland Alliance. You disclosed the funds legally, but you didn't disclose that the alliance itself is funded by a PAC that was fined last year for failing to report its foreign donors. Roberts bristled. Those claims are irresponsible. Are they? She said, eyes lifting. Because I'm reading from your own records. She flipped again. Here's the FEC sanction letter. Paragraph 3, Section D, failure to report foreign-affiliated contributions supplied through intermediary organizations. Viewers at home leaned forward in their chairs. At Data Dunk, she has the folder OMG. At Watchdog Report, this is not a drill. At Truth Survives, R.I.P. Roberts lol. Roberts stammered, this is a mischaracterization. Oh, I'm not done, she said calmly. Beat 2, exposure. Let's talk about August 2nd, she continued, when you voted against Amendment 41, the one that would have required real-time disclosure of donor affiliations. You argued, she glanced down, too much transparency could chill participation. But in the same week, your office accepted another $41,000 in fundraising support from a nonprofit that shares a board member with the Cumberland Alliance. His mouth opened empty. She leaned in slightly. Are you sure you want to keep questioning my capacity, Representative, or should we ask the chair to read that into the record? Roberts' tone shifted from confident to pleading. Congresswoman, you're twisting. No, I'm quoting, she said, her voice somehow softer and sharper at the same time. Paragraph 9 of the audit summary dated September 3rd. She slid the document toward the clerk. Feel free to fact-check. The gallery erupted in murmurs again. Committee members shifted uncomfortably. Even the stenographer missed a keystroke. Roberts' hand trembled just slightly as he reached for his water glass. From the back, a lone reporter whispered, "This is devastating." At neutral, not really. This is the quietest annihilation I've ever seen. She's giving law school final exam energy. At mic drop matrix, Roberts looks like he's buffering. Roberts tried to salvage the ground. These attacks, this tone. Tone, Crockett repeated. Look at my tone. It's steady. It's factual. If you want to talk about tone, let's talk about how your voice rose when I started asking questions you'd rather avoid. That got a gasp, but she wasn't done. Transparency doesn't crumble under questioning, Representative. Obfuscation does. She sat back for the first time, not out of retreat, but completion. A quiet declaration of, your turn. Roberts swallowed hard. His next words came out hoarse. I simply disagree with your framing. She turned her chair toward him fully. You can disagree with my framing, but you can't disagree with government records. And then she delivered the final strike, the sentence that would echo far beyond the walls of Congress. You have repeatedly spoken about protecting public trust, so I'm asking for clarity for the public. Isn't it true that you opposed legislation that would have made your own donors more visible? The silence that followed was total. Beat 3, rebuttal. He cleared his throat, choked on his words. The law requires a balance of. No, she said quietly. The law requires consistency, and right now your record doesn't have it. Roberts looked down at the papers in front of him. His shoulders collapsed inward, as if the weight of scrutiny had finally found a way in. Even the cameras seemed to creep closer. On live streams, in group chats across political Twitter, the reactions cascaded. At History in Motion, I think I just watched a career end. At No Filter Politics, no wonder he tried to shut her up. At Bulletproof Truth, she brought evidence, he brought vibes. Crockett wasn't smiling, she wasn't gloating. She didn't need to, she simply said, I yield my time, and closed her folder. For 1 second, nothing, not a word, not a breath. The entire room seemed suspended, waiting for the world to find its voice again. And then the silence shattered, gasps, papers rustling, cameras blinking awake. Silence, and then the internet exploded. By the time Jasmine Crockett closed her folder and leaned back, she had no idea that she was about to become the most watched person in America for the next 72 hours. The internet pounced like it had been waiting for this moment. Within minutes, someone clipped her line, obfuscation crumbles under questioning. That clip hit Twitter, then flew to TikTok, then spread like wildfire across Instagram Reels. A new hashtag emerged, Crockett Unfiltered, a digital badge of honor. Then came Receipt Queen, first as a meme, then as a movement. One user layered her voice over a Bay-and-Say beat. Another created a split screen comparing Crockett's calm to Roberts' unraveling. Millions watched and shared, adding their own commentary like it was a sporting event. At Queer Justice 42, I would pay to watch her cross-examine my ex. At Latinx Politico, so this is what holding power accountable looks like. At Citizen Louder, the way she said I'm quoting you should be in history books. Receipt Queen No Lies Detected. TikTok exploded, but it didn't stop there. Reddit threads dissected every timestamp. Discord channels for political junkies had live threads titled, "Crockett just ended this dude's career." Someone posted a freeze frame of Roberts stuttering, eyes down, calling it, the moment accountability hit. And by the time cable news caught up hours later, the divide was unmistakable. On one network, the chyron read, Jasmine Crockett, fearless or reckless. On another, standoff in committee, truth vs. power. The more progressive channels played the clip over, and over giving it a full breakdown like it was a game-saving three-point shot in the championship. Talk show hosts praised the calm precision of her takedown. A late-night comedian joked, if John Roberts is confused by transparency, maybe someone should sit him down with some transparent tape and explain it slowly. Meanwhile, the morning after, Variety ran a headline. She shut him down with one question. Jasmine Crockett's mic drop goes mega viral. Celebrities got involved next. A pop star tweeted simply, "She said what?" with the clip attached. An A-list actor posted a reel of himself watching the hearing with popcorn and a proud nod. Fans began recreating her dialogue in dramatic reenactments. High schoolers pretended to be committee members in dueling TikToks. One girl played Crockett with a binder full of colored tabs. Exhibit A, sweetheart. For progressive, immigrant, and identity pride communities, Crockett wasn't just a name anymore, she was a signal. They saw themselves in her restraint, her skill, her refusal to shrink. They'd been interrupted in meetings, underestimated in classrooms, spoken over in boardrooms. And now one of their own, someone with poise and a fire you could feel through a screen, was making the same people uncomfortable who'd ignored them too. The comments said it all. At Diaspora Dynamo, I've chills. Never seen someone be this calm in a storm. At BLK Girl Legal, this is how I want to show up when they try me. At Daughter of Immigrants, that's the face of every auntie who dared someone to talk down to her. Receipt Queen, she did that. In the days that followed, Roberts kept his head down in public, but the whispers grew louder. Rumors circulated that donors were reviewing expectations. One source said, they didn't expect her to be prepared like that. And yet, instead of laying low and letting the moment pass, he made the one mistake every power-shaken politician makes, the one move no seasoned advisor would recommend. John Roberts should have walked away. Instead, he doubled down. The noise online eventually faded. The trending hashtags cooled. Reporters moved on to the next political drama. But something deeper lingered, not just in the headlines, but in the minds of those who had watched. A voiceover, calm but resonant like a quiet truth rising to the surface, summed it up best. This wasn't a victory over a man. It was a victory over a mindset. For years, people in power had assumed they could bark, posture, and intimidate, and the less powerful would shrink away. For years, voices like Jasmine Crockett's had been told to wait their turn, soften their tone, learn the rules, follow the script. But not this time. She didn't shout, she didn't match indignation with anger. She didn't need to. Truth doesn't shout, but it stands its ground. When Crockett faced Roberts, she wasn't proving herself for the first time. She was just finally being heard by people who needed to see someone refuse to back down without losing their composure. Her words didn't just dismantle his arguments, they reassured people watching that facts still matter, that dignity still matters, that showing up prepared is a kind of revolution on its own. And that's why the moment stuck. It wasn't just political, it was personal. If you'd ever been talked down to in a room you deserved to be in, you saw yourself in her. If you'd ever been told to lower your voice instead of raising your evidence, you felt seen. Jasmine's calm wasn't passive, it was powerful. It said what every person who's ever whispered the truth into a louder room already knows. Speaking up isn't about volume, it's about courage. Courage to walk into a place where you're not expected to win. Courage to know your facts even when people try to confuse you. Courage to refuse to let someone else write your narrative. That moment also cracked something open. It wasn't just that Roberts got caught. It was that millions of people finally saw what accountability looks like when wielded with precision instead of rage. It felt like a promise that maybe the next time someone tried to bury truth under condescension and noise, more people would follow her blueprint. More people would come prepared. More people would say, "I yield my time, but I'll never yield my voice." As the room emptied that day, Crockett didn't make a victory speech. She didn't wink at the cameras. She just packed up her notes, nodded once to the clerk, and walked out with the same grace she'd walked in with. But in living rooms, classrooms, phones held in trembling hands, that walk meant everything. Because now there was proof. Proof that the game wasn't rigged beyond repair. Proof that maybe justice isn't loud because it doesn't need to be. The camera fades, a beat of silence. Then the voiceover returns low, certain, echoing with possibility. And America is listening. It all started with a hand slamming on a desk, a voice raised in anger, an attempt to put someone in their place. But the person on the receiving end wasn't rattled, she was ready. Jasmine Crockett didn't match Roberts' anger with anger. She met it with precision, with clarity, with unshakable calm. She didn't need to win the room. She just needed to speak truth into it. And through her, millions of people found something they didn't expect, a reflection of their own moments. Times they were talked down to, times they were underestimated, times when someone louder thought that meant they were right. If you've ever been silenced, this moment was yours, too. Watching Jasmine sit in that chair, watching her dismantle arrogance with nothing but facts and composure, it reminded people that power isn't just who talks the loudest. It's who refuses to shrink, who brings receipts, who stands firm even when the other side tries to make you small. That's why her moment went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. She didn't have to yell to be heard, and neither do you. So if you felt that, if this story lit something up in you, don't let it stop here. Share this if you stand with truth tellers. Subscribe if you're ready for more stories like this. Let's lift voices that refuse to be silenced. Because this is more than a viral hearing. It's a movement. And it needs you.